You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 107. And today I am going to tell you all about my new book, Turn Autism Around, an action guide for parents of young children with early signs of autism, which is now available for pre-order. This episode, I wanted to give you a sneak peek and tell you how this book will help you and every parent, caregiver, and professional you know, even if you're not a parent of a young child with signs of autism. I'm going to also tell you why you should pre-order the book now and help me on my mission to change the way autism is detected and treated for millions of people around the world. It's all about empowering the parent. So let's get to this important episode of Turn Autism Around. If you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know my story, how I fell into the autism world in what I say one day before Lucas's third birthday when he was diagnosed with moderate to severe autism. But I actually fell into the autism world much earlier than that, when Lucas was just 21 months of age. And my husband first mentioned the possibility that Lucas might have autism. I remember the day. I remember standing in the family room of my old house, and I had just brought Spencer, my younger son, back from his 2-month well check with the doctor. And my husband asked me to ask the doctor how many words Lucas should have at that point. And he was 21 months of age. And the doctor said he should have 25 words approximately. So when I came back home after the doctor's visit, my husband said, "How did Spencer do?" And Spencer did fine. But he's like, "What did the doctor say about Lucas's words?" And I said he should have 25. And my husband's like, "He doesn't have 25. "Oh, no, he has 25. And I was counting words like E-I-E-I-O as 5 words. He had this delayed echolalia script, which I talk about in some of the podcasts, where Lucas would say sometimes in the middle of the night, "Please do not feed the ducks, quack, quack," which was a little script he learned at the playground. So when I said to my husband that he had 25 words, I was really stretching. I was pulling out words that I hadn't heard for months. I was pulling out syllables. But anyway, I told him, "Oh no, he has the 25 words. And at that point, my husband, who's an emergency medicine physician, he said, "So you don't think, or he doesn't think Lucas might have autism?" And I remember like almost seeing stars. Like I was just so like, what? Never thinking about autism, never thinking really there was anything going on with Lucas. He had some words, I was a mom of 2 very young kids. It was winter time. We were watching a lot of Barney, and we were inside a lot, and I was breastfeeding Spencer, and I had my hands full. But I had never thought about autism. And so at that moment, I told my husband, I never, ever want to hear the word autism again, which is kind of ironic because now I say, type, read, speak the word autism hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. I don't even know if I could count. I often joke, like, how much do I actually say it, read it, type it? Anyway, so Charlie didn't mention it again. The autism. I mean, it was like the elephant in the room. But once he said it, it was like out. But we never talked about it. We never argued about it. We just kind of were like, fingers crossed that he's going to catch up. And so a whole nother year went by. And then the preschool where he was going, he went to 2-year-old preschool. He started in the following September. So this is like February of 98. He started in September preschool. He started speech therapy. So we were hopeful that it was just going to be a speech delay and he would catch up. But it was a whole nother year before I started coming out of denial, like pretty much when Lucas was, so delayed that I'm like, I'm trying to get him to talk. And meanwhile, I have no idea how to teach him to talk because I wasn't a behavior analyst. And I had no idea what a man-tact interverbal was. It was a very confusing time. I practically begged the speech therapist for information, for videos, there wasn't like YouTube or anything like that. There was just like, what books can I read? What can I do, in between speech sessions? And she really didn't have a lot of advice for me. So meanwhile, Lucas, I'm trying to get him to say ball. Meanwhile, the 2.5, 3-year-old kids are coming out of preschool saying, can I go over to Johnny's house and play? And all this language. And I was just like, oh my goodness. So it took me more than a year to get out of denial till I started looking into the possibility. And then when the internet was just coming around to be a thing. And once I started reading about autism, I knew that he had it. And I didn't know this, but through behavioral therapy, through applied behavior analysis type of therapy, that kids could make drastic gains with ABA. And I didn't know that. So then I felt horribly guilty that I spent a whole year in denial, more than a year. And so this is really detailed in the first chapter of my book. And it's really the reason that I wrote my book, because by the time Lucas was diagnosed one day before his 3rd birthday, 15, 16 months after my husband first mentioned the possibility, by that point, he had moderate to severe autism. He also had an intellectual disability. He was so far behind. He was like 3 years old, but speaking at a 9-month-old level. And so the gap just got so wide. And so when I asked the doctor about applied behavior analysis, he said, yes, definitely you have to do ABA. That's the most proven treatment for children with autism. Gave me a bunch of phone numbers, to call and look into. But then when I asked him if Lucas could get all better or could, be indistinguishable like the book I had read, he basically said that no, that in his 30-year career, this is Dr. James Copeland, who I did a podcast with a while ago. So you can look for that in the show notes. I'll put that in the show notes. But, he said basically Lucas's gap was just too big. And in his experience, kids like Lucas didn't become indistinguishable or quote unquote recover from autism. And that made me feel even more guilty. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, I got us into this mess by my denial. I have to figure out how to get us out of it. And I often say I fell into the autism world, quote unquote, because it had literally felt like I had fallen into a deep hole, and I had Lucas with me, and I had to figure out how to climb out with him on my back. Back in the late 90s, there really wasn't much in terms of parent training, parent empowerment. It was extremely confusing. And my book, one of the reasons, the main reason I wrote my book is because I needed a map to crawl out of that hole and to start climbing the mountain with Lucas. And there really wasn't one back then, and there still isn't one now. And over the past 20 years, I went from a confused, overwhelmed, stressed out parent in denial to, I already was a registered nurse. I became a board certified behavior analyst, wrote my first book in 2007, which we're going to talk about the differences between my two books. And then, went on to really figure out a step-by-step system to help kids with autism, of all ages. But the best time to treat kids is at the very first signs, and when we can really turn things around as much as possible. So in chapter 1, I detail all of that about my story, but I also talk about how in 1999, when Lucas was diagnosed, the rate of autism was 1 in 500, and now it's about 1 in 50. Plus, 1 in 6 kids have a type of developmental disorder, whether that's autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, cerebral palsy, speech disorders. So 1 in every 6 children. So what I've learned over the years is this treatment, ABA, and using the verbal behavior approach and using the Turn Autism Around strategies, this all works for typically developing kids. It works for kids with early signs of ADHD, which are very similar to children, early signs of autism and speech delays. So, I also, in the first chapter, talk about, my story, this increase, and also throughout the book, I talk about how I worked with kids, very young kids, starting in 2000. Well, really, I worked with very young kids starting when I became a behavior analyst in 2003. I worked for the Pennsylvania Verbal Behavior Project, but was mostly in schools. But then in 2010, I began working with very little kids, birth to 3-year-old kids, and then 3 to 5-year-old kids too. So I helped kids like Chino, who is in the first chapter. And Chino, out of all the hundreds of kids I've helped directly, like hands-on helped directly, Chino was the child when I started that reminded me the most of Lucas when they were both about 20, 21 months of age. Like when my husband first mentioned it, and then I saw Chino around the same age. And he looked like a quiet kid. He wasn't banging his head. He wasn't, aggressive. He wasn't even in his own world. He just looked very speech delayed. But when you looked closer, with one of the assessments that I have used and is detailed a little bit in my book, the STAT, the screening tool for autism in toddlers. And I have pre and post videos of Chino with me doing the STAT with the doll play program, and that's detailed in the first chapter of my book too. But kids like Chino made major transformations, and we can put his pre and post videos, just short clips, in the show notes at marybarbera.com/107 to go to the show notes. So many of you know me and started following me because of my first book. And you may be wondering why I decided to write another book, and how is the Turn Autism Around book different from my verbal behavior approach book? So as I said, the verbal behavior approach book was published in 2007 by a small niche publisher called Jessica Kingsley Publishers. Back when I wrote it in 2006, I had no website. I didn't have a platform. I didn't even know what the difference was between a website and a platform. I had no Facebook. There wasn't any Facebook around at that point. And I really didn't know how to reach people. I was a mom. I was a mom of 2 kids. I think Spencer and Lucas were around 8 to 10 years of age when I wrote the book and when I published the book. I had a BCBA. I was a board certified behavior analyst since 2003, but that's pretty much it. But I knew back then that I knew how to help kids. And I knew that most of the information was in my head. And back then in 2007, the books that I had been recommending and reading were 1993, 1996, really old books. So I knew I needed to write that book, and it just kind of came to me. I didn't think it was going to be this huge success, which it really has been. It's still selling better than ever. It sold more than 50,000 copies in the first decade and is available in over a dozen languages. And it still is often in the top 10 or top 20 autism books, bestsellers on Amazon. Many of the top 10 are very old books like mine. But the verbal behavior approach book I wrote it when I was working for the Pennsylvania Verbal Behavior Project. It's really for older kids. I mean, you can use it any age, but definitely you have to have the diagnosis of autism for people to look into it seriously. Older kids with significant delays, moderate severe autism, mild intellectual disability. And those are the kind of parents and professionals that I have attracted with the Verbal Behavior Approach book. Even this podcast has mostly been about kids, older kids with more significant needs, non-conversational kids that need to learn how to eat better, sleep better, potty train, dress themselves, shower themselves, because I feel like I'm an expert on all of those things, because Lucas has needed to learn all of those things, and he's learned it with ABA, the Verbal Behavior Approach. But the Verbal Behavior Approach book doesn't cover anything about very young children just showing signs of autism. And there's new research by Dr. Ami Klin, which pretty much shows, and I did a whole podcast on this, episode number 93, marybarbera.com/93. We'll put that in the show notes as well. But I did a podcast episode about Ami Klin's work, which shows that not in all cases, but in some cases, a child presents with early signs of autism, you can prevent or reverse some speech delays or disorders. You can prevent or reverse behavioral disorders, and prevent the intellectual disability that usually comes because the gap gets too wide the longer you wait. So with that research, even before I read about his research, I had started working on my Turn Autism Around book, because I was consulting door to door with kids like Chino. I have several other clients that are within the pages of my new book. Max, who avoided a diagnosis of autism. Faith, who really did extraordinarily well. Sam and Drew, who are brothers. Sam has moderate severe autism. Drew started showing some issues right around the time he turned 3. I think he's probably not going to ever be on the spectrum, but just some of the concerns that can come down the pike. We also feature Cody in the book, whose stories are told by his mother on a podcast episode in the past. So Cody's mom, Jenna, which we'll link in the show notes. So Cody was a client who started out with motor delays early on. So by the time he was 1, he already had a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and a teacher on his early intervention team. But he wasn't really making any progress until he got a diagnosis of autism, and until mom started an ABA focus within the team, the early intervention team. So in addition to, from 2010 to 2016, going door to door to these kids, and seeing all kinds of gains, kids not diagnosed with autism or just diagnosed with autism, very young children, empowering the parents, and working with the early intervention teams. In addition to doing that, I was also speaking internationally, all around the country, all around the world, flying to Australia to speak to a sold out crowd of 300 for a keynote presentation. But there's only so much you can present in a keynote presentation of 1 hour, or even if I did a 2-day workshop, there was only so much that you could present. And I just felt like I had a lot of the answers. I had a new step-by-step approach based on all of my work with all of my clients, but I wasn't moving the needle. And so I knew I needed to get this information out to the world. I even earned a PhD in leadership in 2011 and did a dissertation on how to train adults on verbal behavior. And when people said in 2011, when I graduated with my PhD, people would say, well, so what are you going to do now? And I said, I would always answer the same. I'm going to figure out how to get my message out online and out to millions of people. And until then, I'm going to continue to play potato head with kids like Cody and Gino and Max and Faith and all of my clients who came down the way. So in 2014, I was on my way to and from Germany to speak, and I read Jeff Walker's book called Launch. He's doing a second edition in 2021, which I'm excited about, but I read his 2014 edition of Launch, and it was step by step, and it basically taught me how to get my message out online. And so in March of 2015, I started my very first course, online course for parents and professionals. And we've now had parents and professionals from over 80 countries take my courses, including the toddler preschooler online course, which has been helping so many very young children, both with a diagnosis of autism and without a diagnosis. Remember how I said that the rate of autism went from 1 in 500 to 1 in 50. So that huge increase has caused a waiting list for evaluations, for treatment. It's really common to wait in line for an evaluation from 9 months to 2 years. So while some of the denial is probably gone because everybody knows somebody with delays and autism, the waiting lists have now become so long that it's kind of like my 1.5 years in denial, or my year and a few months in denial, and then a few month waiting list. It's like now we're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And as parents wait, they not only worry, but their kids fall further and further behind. So once I started the toddler preschooler course, and started seeing some major transformations without ever seeing kids, without ever reviewing videos or giving them specific guidance. I mean, basically, it's an online course and community, but it's so step by step. The parents are coming in and seeing all kinds of progress. And that's why I wanted to write the second book. And many of these kids, not only my old clients who I was thankful to get a lot of video permission to have these videos show exactly what to do, but my online customers who bought into the online courses are also featured in the book. So some of the toddlers, like Kelsey's 2 boys, Brentley and Lincoln. Now, Kelsey took our course years ago, and she helped me with her videos create the toddler preschooler course. And Kelsey is now our community manager. And she was interviewed on podcast number 3 all the way back 2 years ago. So marybarbera.com/3. Kelsey's a great asset to our community, but her kids, especially, well, both of her kids have made miraculous progress. And Brentley started out being very unsafe in the community. She's a single mom, so she either needed to carry Brentley on the back and Lincoln on the front, or she needed to have Lincoln on her body strapped to her and a leash and a harness out in the community. He also banged his head up to 100 times a day. She was in crisis when she found my course, and she was even driving Brentley to an ABA clinic an hour away from her house. So that's all detailed, but Brentley and Lincoln are doing great now. And she's learned to become the captain of the ship, and she's now has other services in place as well. So this, my courses, this book is going to give you the information to know what you need to do and know how you need to work with other professionals locally, in your area, or even at a distance to get your kids what they need right now and in the future. And whether you have a very young child with early signs of autism, which is what the book's about, but if you have a 10-year-old or 8-year-old who has some needs, is not conversational, has needs in many of the areas we cover in the book, it will also be great. So in addition to Kelsey's kids, we have other online participants. Their kids are featured, Parker, Landon. We even have Michelle C., who did podcast number 78. Her daughter, Elena, made so many gains that she's actually featured in chapter 8 on basic talking, because Elena went from 2 words in 1 hour on a baseline language sample to 180 words and phrases in an hour within 5 weeks of Michelle learning from us online. The other thing that I don't really talk about that much is this was all during the COVID shutdown. So Elena was diagnosed in February of 2020. The world shut down, and Michelle was left with Elena and her baby sister to try to help her. And boy, did she help her, because she really turned things around. So Elena goes on to be featured also in chapter 9 of how to get 1 and 2 word utterances into phrases, into conversation. And then Michelle had problems after, she was done the toddler course. She had problems with, all of a sudden, Elena was screaming for a bathtub. And so she posted within our Facebook community, and I asked, was Elena held down for anything? Like a doctor's visit. And she said, yes, she had just had an MRI and she was held down for that. And that can often spill over into, then they won't want to get a bath, or you're thinking, well, how could that? Very common. So we have a whole chapter on desensitization to doctors, dentists, haircuts, bath time, anything. You need to put eye drops in your kids' eyes. Like, how is that going to be? And we break it all down and teach you how to break things down, teach you how to fish, so that you know what to do at every step. So I knew that after I read Jeff Walker's book and created my online courses, I was really thinking, like, okay, now I figured out how to get my message online. I'll just keep doing that. But then I was actually at a mastermind with Jeff Walker, who became my online mentor, and he encouraged me to write a book. And I knew that if I wrote another book, it would have to be for the parents of toddlers and preschoolers, because the transformations with the young children that I wasn't even seeing, that were taking, their parents were taking my online courses, and their early intervention professionals were also taking the courses. And I knew that these kids were making all kind of progress, that this would be my next book. So my Turn Autism Around book is directly going to impact those kids, even without a diagnosis. Because these kids that come in, whether you're seeing them professionally for 1 hour a week, or if you're seeing them at a clinic for many hours a week, or if you're, if they're online for any parts of the world. I mean, some of these kids are getting no services. Some are on waiting lists for speech therapy. Kids in the United States, even if they get services through the early intervention system, it's often 1 hour of OT, 1 hour of speech, just very, very little services. And if parents don't know how to advocate, kids can even get less therapy than that. But kids with speech and social delays, especially kids with behavior issues, often get worse when you just piece together what we call eclectic type therapy. These are all well-meaning, very seasoned professionals, but when you have autism or significant signs of autism, many times we always best to have a coordinated approach where everybody's working on the same goals, the same child-friendly, positive strategies. So with my new book, I knew if I was going to write one, I wanted it to be as big as possible, to reach as many hands as possible. I mean, this book took me 10 times the amount of work to write. So I have a major publisher, Hay House, who's been wonderful to work with. I have a team to help me launch this book. It will be a hardback book. It will also be available in Kindle. And I read the book recently for Audible, so it's going to be on Audible also. And I'll have all the handouts within the book, the assessment forms and the planning forms and all of that stuff. I'll have that available at turnautismaround.com. That's where you can pre-order the book, and we will have all the resources. So I really I'm very excited because I do think that this book will be huge. Dr. Temple Grandin wrote a beautiful foreword, and the book has already been endorsed by parents, professionals, thought leaders, everyone who has read it has given me great feedback. And so I'm really hoping that this is going to help a lot of people. So there are 14 chapters in the book. It's a pretty big book. We have chapters on the early signs of autism, keeping your child safe, reducing tantrums and other problem behaviors. There's 2 chapters on teaching talking, one on basic talking, one on advanced talking, 1 chapter dedicated to social skills and whether your child or clients should be at a preschool, whether they're benefiting, what kind of goals you should have for them. And then we also have chapters on improving picky eating, sleeping, potty training, and trips to the doctor, dentist, and barber. That's where we have the steps that Elena's mom took to repair the bathtub, which she did within a week. And then she was actually having Elena request baths. That's how easy it can be in some situations. Now, not everybody makes the kind of gains that Elena made, but we have lots of stories of lots of different success, and each child, we really want to reach his or her fullest potential to be as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible. Throughout the book, I talk about how I really want to empower at least one parent, if not both parents, to become the captain of the ship and to coordinate care and learning. The leading ideas behind the new book are these. Parents need to be empowered to catch and treat the earliest signs of autism, also signs of ADHD, speech delays, learning differences. If it turns out not to be autism, you are going to be well into learning how you can advocate for your child forever and how to be his best teacher and to have a happy child who's not crying and not whining and not tantruming. The second idea is that parents of young children with signs of autism can't afford to be in denial or in waiting in line for 9 months to 2 years for evaluations and diagnosis and treatment. But you can get started by just the information in the book, and now it's only available for pre-order, so you really do want to check out the online courses as well. Number 3, parents of older kids who are still not conversational or those with problem behaviors and self-care deficits need help too. And this book will provide a map and step-by-step directions to move forward. It's hard when you're writing a book if you're not writing to a kind of a target audience. So my target audience is really parents of young children from ages 1 to 5 and early intervention professionals. But there are so many great strategies and assessment tools that will help all kids that are functioning in the 1 to 5 year old level in terms of talking or sleeping or eating or problem behaviors. And which kind of really goes with the podcast and my courses. I really am dedicating my life to helping kids within like the BB MAP range, which is 1 to 4-year-olds, 1 to 5-year-olds. And whether that's my 24-year-old son who is still functioning within the VB MAP levels in many areas, specifically language. But he continues to get better and better as we work on different things. Like he's getting better with answering why questions now. And so the journey is going to be different for older kids, and it's going to be different for every child. But I think this book will really give you a guide to get you started. Another idea is the techniques. The techniques in the book are all given in my paid courses, but now it will be available in a book too, and it will help to reach more people. I will say that the book plus the courses is going to be your best option, because in the courses we give you all this video tutorials of what to do. But in many situations, like with me with Jeff Walker's book launch, I was able to take just the book and I was able to launch. And then in a lot of cases, I think, especially if you have professionals on board who already know about ABA and verbal behavior, you might be able to just take the book and run with it as well. Another idea, the Turn Autism Around movement, is I want to see and I want to change the way autism is detected and treated. It is never too early to start looking for signs and treating the signs, and it's also never too late. And as I said, my goal is for each child to reach his or her fullest potential. Okay, so why I'm talking about the book is actually going to be published on March 30th, but it is available now, today, starting in mid-January for pre-order. So why should you go to turnautismaround.com and pre-order the book? So a couple reasons. If you pre-order the book now, you can get started immediately helping your child or clients, because you're going to get some access to some great bonuses, including exclusive video interview with Dr. Temple Grandin. You'll get access to some of the book right now, and you will also be able to attend a free workshop. And if you act right now, pre-order the book, you can also join my book launch team and help me spread the word and get the approach out to millions of people around the world. So I hope this podcast helps energize and motivate you to pre-order the Turn Autism Around book today at turnautismaround.com. I really am excited. I hope you are too. And I hope this episode helped you understand why I wrote the book and to get excited, because I'm excited. And I think you as an avid podcast listener are going to really benefit. So thank you very much.